Hey, this is Stefan from Only Comic Books. Been a fan of the Comics Alternative for a while now, and appreciate the stellar quality. Hopefully my Patreon support can contribute to a new trade.
This is the Comics Alternative, episode 152. Reviews of Nanjing, the Burning City, Plutona, number 1, and Lose, number 7. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this episode of the podcast, we're going to be looking at 3 recent titles. First, we're going to be looking at the new graphic novel from Ethan Young, Nanjing, the Burning City. After that, we're going to look at issue number 1 of Plutona, written by Jeff Lemire with art by Lenox. And then finally, we're going to look at issue number 7 of Lose by Michael DeForge. But before we get into that discussion, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you'll find DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are at 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible specials, and September is no exception. Sometimes specials will be at 45% off cover price, sometimes at 50% off, but often you can find discounts that go higher than that.
And as Derek said, the September discounts are posted now on DCB Service. Among those, as you've come to expect, will be several different bundles, which gives you a significant savings rather than buying these issues individually. A couple of those bundles that they have is they have a Valiant bundle, the newest 7 Valiant titles for 50% off. Of course, they have a lot of Marvel and DC bundles. There is a Vertigo bundle, number 2, that is 50% off, but, and this is incredible, a Vertigo bundle number 1, which is 4 new Vertigo titles for 75% off.
Yow!
Yeah, yow is right. And if you guys have been listening to Derek and Andy do the previews catalog special, you know that they've been talking a good bit about the new stuff coming out from Vertigo. That bundle at 75% off includes Jacked number 1, Red Thorn number 1, Slash and Burn number 1, and Unfollow number 1. 75% off. It's what you would pay for one comic, and you're getting 4.
That's right. You know, you really can't beat their discounts. They're great people to work with, and they do not mind late orders, and I can speak from experience. In fact, just yesterday, which is Saturday, the first weekend of September, I just placed my August order. But they don't mind. They do accept late orders. So go to the website and check out the great deals that they have. That's dcbservice.com. You got to go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs, and after you do get your comics there, send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
Yeah, and you just can't beat those deals, so do check them out.
Yeah, and you know, we make it really easy to email DCB Service and let them know that you heard about them through the Comics Alternative. If you go to our website, go to the front page, you'll find a link that says email the guys at DCB Service, and if you click on that, it should automatically bring up a message in whatever email reader that you use.
Yep.
So that's what we do, Andy. We're here to serve our listeners.
We are here to serve.
Yes. And speaking of our listeners, before we get to this week's reviews, I want to highlight some of the mail that we've gotten over the past week. In fact, one of our listeners, one of our Patreon supporters, Don Witzel, emailed me the other day to let me know that a new show called The Carmichael Show will be coming out soon, and he mentioned this because his wife is the executive producer and really the showrunner of the Carmichael Show. And he even sent a link to check out this show. It's m.nbc.com/the-Carmichael-show. And when he sent that to me, I didn't know exactly what he was referring to. Because I hadn't heard, I really don't watch much network television, but I asked him about it, and he said that, yeah, his wife is in the entertainment field, and in fact, she has worked on shows such as New Girl, My Name is Earl, George Lopez, and Whitney. And so that's good to know. So Don Witzel, our proud Patreon supporter, his wife is a showrunner for the Carmichael Show. So check that out and see what some of our Patreon supporters and their families are doing in the field of entertainment.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. I'm glad Don shared that with us.
You know, something else happened over the past several days that was a little unusual. Now, it's not unusual for us to get messages from listeners to say we really like what you're doing, and we do appreciate that. What's so unusual about this past week is that we got 2 messages via YouTube, our YouTube channel, both of them from different people, and both of them were received on the exact same day. So it's a little strange. The first message we got was from Sam Deely, and he wrote, "Enjoying the show, keep up the good work."
Okay, short and sweet.
So, Sam, thank you very much for that and for posting that comment on YouTube. We do appreciate that. And then the other message we got on YouTube is from Stefan, and he has his own YouTube channel called Only Comic Books. He writes, "I love this series, guys. Keep up the great work." And I checked out his website or his YouTube channel, Only Comic Books, and it is really, really good. It's not a podcast; it's a YouTube channel, and so he utilizes the video to the utmost. You know, on our YouTube channel, basically what I do is to take our audio, I include the cover of that particular episode, the album cover of the episode. It's a still static image, so the image doesn't move, but if you play the quote-unquote video on the Comics Alternative, you'll hear the show, but it's just one image, and that's it. But what Stefan does on Only Comic Books is he takes videos of him looking through the comic that he's discussing. And these are relatively short videos, so they're no more than about 10, 12, 15, maybe 20 minutes long tops. And they're great kind of in and out discussions of whatever titles that it is that he's looking at. And, you know, recently we did get listener feedback telling us that our shows are really good. Could we make them a little shorter? So, you know, that's not the way we roll. I do understand that some people may like their podcasts or content a little shorter for whatever reason. But if you think that the Comics Alternative is a little too long, then you should definitely check out Stefan's Only Comic Books channel on YouTube. So I want to thank Stefan for that message. And on the topic of Stefan, he is also our latest Patreon patron.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you, Stefan, for your support, and we look forward to taking a look at your YouTube channel, Only Comic Books. Actually, I'm on it right now, just kind of tooling around. It looks great.
Yeah. In fact, I do have a link to Only Comic Books from the Patreon patrons page of the website. So Stefan is the brand new patron. He joins the noble ranks of Christopher Baird, Pratik Thomas, Art Bowser, Daniel White, Christopher Michael, Paul Lay, Sal Good Sam, Michael Norhale, Tom Matthews, Don Witzel, Simon Brilsby, David Campbell, and Raider Koshnik.
You know, Derek, revolutions start small.
That's right.
So I think we got the beginnings of a nice revolution going.
Yeah. And in fact, we even heard a little endorsement from Stefan at the very beginning of the show. So, Stefan, thank you very much for doing that for us.
Yeah, Stefan, that's really, really cool. Thanks again.
So, Andy, you want to get into a discussion of the titles we're looking at for this week?
Yeah, let's do that.
Now, the first book we're looking at is Nanjing, the Burning City. This is written and illustrated by Ethan Young, and it's published by Dark Horse. And Andy, had you heard of Ethan Young, or were you familiar with any of his works before Nanjing?
I did not. I did a little bit of investigation on Mr. Young and saw that he is a freelance illustrator and designer and has worked on several cartoons for Fox, but apparently he has 2 books out that I didn't know about that I think you did know about called Tales. And maybe you could probably speak to those better than I can, since I've never seen them, and I think you have one of them or both of them.
Yeah, I've got Tales Book 1, and interestingly enough, when I got my copy of Nanjing the other week and was looking through it, I was checking out Ethan Young and saw that he was also the author of Tales, and the cover of Book 1 really looked familiar. Back when we started the podcast in 2012, Hermes Press, which published Tales Book 1 and Tales Book 2, sent us several titles that we didn't request. I think we were requesting one, but because we were a new podcast, they thought that we may like to check out some of their other books that they had published at that time. And one of them was Tales, and I remember reading through it at the time, and I thought, okay, well, this is interesting. Now, we didn't do anything with the book. I put that away somewhere, and I couldn't remember where. So after reading Nanjing, I thought, okay, I have to fish out my copy of Tales. And I found it and was refreshing myself on it. And it is really good. Tales started off as a webcomic, and I think he published an earlier book of Tales before Tales Book 1, Tales Life in Progress. But then Tales Book 1 came out in fall of 2012, almost exactly 3 years ago. And then in late 2013, Tales Book 2 came out. But from what I understand, and maybe I'm wrong here, and if Ethan's listening to this, he can write us and let us know if I'm off base here, that I think what appears in the Tale books were originally webcomics, and they're very different from Nanjing. They're, I guess, autobiographical or semi-autobiographical. Even the most autobiographical works are going to be fictionalized to some degree, and even the strictest kind of fiction is going to be somewhat autobiographical in a little bit, I would guess. But yeah, those are very different from Nanjing. Nanjing is definitely not autobiographical at all. And in fact, if you were going to describe Nanjing, the Burning City, to our listeners, just to get them interested, how would you do so?
Well, I would probably start by saying that Nanjing itself is, which most listeners may know, maybe they don't know, but Nanjing is one of the great atrocities of the 20th century. And the great thing about this book, Nanjing, the Burning City, is you don't have to know much about the history of it to appreciate the book. Probably the most famous book that I know of about Nanjing is Iris Chang's The Rape of Nanking, which I actually got a copy, and I couldn't even get past the pictures. They're just so horrific. I flipped through it and thought, this is something I can't read right now. Just a horrific war. Just man's inhumanity to man is just rampant through that. And when I got Nanjing and I flipped through it, I thought, thank God this is in black and white, because it doesn't. And even then, there's really not that much graphic violence in Nanjing, the Burning City. So much of it is suggested. We do get some of it, but let me get into the story to tell you what it's about. As we start this book, there's a brief introduction about the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Japanese army invading and seizing the city of Nanjing in December of 1937. Many Chinese officers at that time left their troops and fled the city, leaving their troops without any kind of leadership whatsoever. And Nanjing, the Burning City, is largely about some of those men as well as some of the civilians who were left behind.
Yeah, and Nanjing used to be the capital city of the Republic of China, so it becomes important for that reason as well. And I'm glad that you mentioned that Ethan included this setup at the very beginning of the book. And he ends that setup on that first page that says, this is the story about the forgotten ones. And then we get this artist's voice at the very end as well, which And I think it's worth noting here, given the historical context that you were setting up, Andy. And I want to read a little bit of what Ethan writes at the very end of the book. He says, the Nanjing massacre lasted for 6 weeks, claiming the lives of 300,000 Chinese civilians and prisoners of war. The Second Sino-Japanese War was eventually consumed into the larger global conflict of World War II. When the Empire of Japan surrendered in 1945, Japanese military records on the massacre were destroyed, preventing an estimation of the exact death toll. The Nanjing War Crimes Tribunal later prosecuted the atrocities of mass rape, torture, and mass executions. Today, there are still some Japanese historical revisionists who claim that the massacre never occurred, further complicating the contentious Sino-Japanese relations. In 1985, the Nanjing Memorial Hall was opened in the former capital, commemorating the 300,000 lives lost, men, women, children, and soldiers whose names we will never know. And I mention this because I think one way of reading Nanjing, the burning city, is as a monument to these people, whose names, as he points out, we'll never know.
Yes, I mean, this is a story that certainly could have happened. It could have happened many, many times over, but it's not based specifically on any historical fact other than the backdrop, Nanjing being the backdrop of this story. And Derek, what we see in the very beginning of Ethan Young's story is we see a man running through the ruins of Nanjing, hiding from the Japanese soldiers and tanks. We learn that this man is an army captain, and we only know him as Captain. We never get his name. And one of his soldiers, a man named Liu, and they're hiding out from the Japanese amongst all these ruins. Immediately, they have conflicting ideas of the best way to evade the Japanese. The captain wants to head west to reach the Yijiang Gate, but Liu suggests that they should head for the safety zone instead, posing as civilians and hiding within the zone. And right from the beginning, there's a conflict. The captain says, those damn Westerners inside the safety zone won't be able to protect you. I can navigate the streets here with my eyes blindfolded. So this conflict is immediate between the officer and the soldier. And Liu's idea actually makes more sense, but the captain is, after all, the captain. And this is a very well-played introduction to these characters. The captain is not a typical military, power-hungry, insane leader, although he does have some definite ideas about what they should do. But Liu is neither cowering or quite insubordinate. There's a lot of great complexity to these characters, and it comes across not only in the writing, but I think, Derek, also in the art. The way that Young has these characters' facial expressions, they're so well drawn and so convincing that you almost don't even need the dialogue. And add to this the way that the Young arranges his panels. It's a really great mixture of traditional horizontal panels mixed with like cantered or tilted panels, implying that everything in Captain and Liu's world is off-kilter and volatile and dangerous.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned the character building in Nanjing. It is, let me see, I'm trying to look at it's about, if you include the sketches at the very end, maybe a tad over 200 pages. So the graphic novel itself is just under 200 pages. So in a way, it is substantial, but the story goes so quickly. It's such an engaging read that it doesn't seem long at all. I know I don't know if you had the same experience, but when I finished Nanjing, the Burning City, I thought, is that it? Is it over with already? Because it just went so quickly for me. And that's the sign of really good storytelling. And I think a lot of that is based on the character development that we get over a relatively short time period. Because if you go back and look at the narrative time that this story, over which this story takes place, there's not a lot. And so you mentioned early on the disagreement between the captain and Liu as to what route to take. And I don't want to give anything away, but I will say that the captain's gut was probably right. In that would have been the safest way out, to reach the gate and try to swim the river, which Liu thought would be a little more difficult. But because of complications that occur along the way. They end up going to the safe zone. But we do get, both of us have mentioned this conflict between Captain and Lou, but it's not a contentious conflict. Basically, it's Lou saying, well, I think we should do one thing, and the captain says, well, no, let's do something else. This is actually a better idea. And besides, I'm captain. So, right. They do have a good relationship, and there's only one point in the story where Lou sort of, not completely, but sort of stands up to the captain, and that's when they leave an older man, a Chinese man, behind, someone who wants Captain and Lou to go with him, either go with him into the safe zone or for them to take him with them as they try to escape the city. And, of course, the captain refuses, realizing that, it's not an easy decision, but he would weigh us down, and our chances of getting away are greatly diminished. So the captain, I don't think he's heartless by any means, because Ethan Young shows him to be a very complex, three-dimensional character. And he's someone who makes hard decisions, but he does have an emotional side to him. But he does know the captain knows when to squelch those emotions, to tap them down, and to do what needs to be done to get him and his men, in this case Lou, to safety.
Yeah, you're right. It's not the type of conflict that you might think is just like you said, it's not a constant. They're not at each other's throats about things, but it is such a great look at their characters to show that they're not one-dimensional. And we see the same thing later. I know we're going to touch on this. We see the same thing near the end of the book when we look at the Japanese colonel. Everything there is not quite black and white as well. But, I was thinking throughout this that you've got a really unusual situation. You don't have a commander here talking to a troop or a regiment. That's one thing. But when it's a commander talking to one other soldier who can think for himself, it becomes a matter of duty and honor versus common sense. Mm-hmm. And there's one part where the captain tells Lou, he says, there's no room for any sentiment during the war. And Lou counters with not the first or the last quote from Confucius. He says, faced with what is right, to leave it undone shows a lack of courage. So he's frequently quoting Confucius, which irritates the captain to no end. But there is that great... And
he's not the only one who quotes Confucius to the captain.
He's not the only one as well, yeah. So there's so much great character building going on here. It's not just the typical type of back and forth that you might think from an insubordinate soldier. It's much more layered than that.
And, you mentioned the Japanese colonel, and I'm glad you did, because I want to talk about the way that Young represents the Japanese soldiers, and not only the colonel, in Nanjing, the Burning City. Now, if you're not aware, Ethan Young was born to two Chinese immigrants in New York. So he was born here in the United States. Mr. Donald Trump, I hope you're listening. And I just had to throw that in.
Oh, I'm glad you threw it in.
Yeah. So, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because given the history, especially in the early 20th century, between Japan and China, this becomes significant. I think it would be very easy for someone with a Chinese lineage to represent the Japanese in a completely almost evil, two-dimensional manner, to show them very unattractively, maybe the ways that others would represent the Germans, let's say, during the same time period, the 1930s and 1940s. And even though there were tons of atrocities committed by the Japanese against the Chinese during that time, one of the things that Young does is resists the temptation to make the Japanese into complete villains. Yes, there are a number of Japanese soldiers who are heartless, who pillage, rape, and murder, And so he doesn't sugarcoat things when it comes to the history. But at the same time, Young does demonstrate some humanity and some complexity within the Japanese troops, and especially within the character of the Japanese colonel. Even outside of the colonel, though, there is, and I think he's given a name and I can't recall the name. There's one Japanese soldier who, his fellow soldiers are raping some of the young women, the girls really, that they capture. And he doesn't want any part of that. And the reason why we suspect is because he's a virgin, so he's a little uncertain about things. But it's not just that. This Japanese soldier does seem to have an aversion to the dehumanizing effect that the war has on his fellow Japanese soldiers. So there's some humanity shown in him. Now, in terms of the Japanese colonel, we do get to see someone who has a human side. This is not anyone who is ordering his troops to commit mass murder. In fact, on the contrary, he's someone who takes his troops to task for the kind of things that they're doing.
Yes.
Taking food from
Yes.
kids. Like,
Right.
at one point, when, what's her name? The mother and her son, they're the ones who are getting Liu, smuggling him into the safe zone. At one point, the son is, he has a bag of rice, and a Japanese soldier is going to take it from him. But the Japanese colonel comes up and says, "That is his rice. We do not do that. Give it back to him."
Yeah, the Japanese colonel is very smart, and you never lose sight. Young never lets us lose sight of the fact that he is the enemy to the Chinese, but he also, at least as you said, has some level of compassion for these refugees. And the young man that you mentioned, I think Yoshi is his name, the one that the other soldiers are trying to get him to lose his virginity. And Yoshi has a great line in this, and they're telling him, this is just have your way with them, find a girl and just have fun. And Yoshi says, there is absolutely nothing about this that can be called fun. Mm-hmm. So you've got a lot of great character building, and the thing about this is all of this character building really comes to a head at the very end, which we're not going to reveal what happens. But it's because these characters are so complex and stereotypical that the ending has such impact.
Exactly. And again, we don't want to give away the detail of the ending, but I do want to talk a little bit about the ending and what happens, because it's between the two main characters here. I guess arguably the two main characters in terms of an antagonistic relationship. The captain, the Chinese captain, and the Japanese colonel. Now, I mentioned a second ago that Young humanizes some of the Japanese troops, in particular the colonel, but at the same time, he doesn't let us lose sight of the fact that the colonel, the Japanese colonel, is really not the nicest of people, in that we get to see his ideological side. And this comes at the very end of the book, where the colonel is talking with the captain, and he basically, and this is something he truly believes, he tells the captain that the way things are right now, this is the best thing for the Chinese people. The West has been carving you guys up for years. You're not doing anything about it. And so what the Japanese Empire is doing is taking over territory in China and elsewhere. And what we will do is provide a strong Asian identity. And it's only through our conquest that Asia can become strong again. And he's trying to get the Chinese captain to understand this, but the captain won't have anything to do with that ideology. And so on the one hand, we do see a more human side of the Japanese colonel. On the other hand, behind that humanness is a complete buy-in with this empire ideology that the Japanese, through conquest, is going to save the Pan-Asian area. They're going to create a new empire, and so he buys into that. And that's not very attractive. But again, that gets back to the complexities of the characterization in this book. Because on the one hand, you think, okay, this is an evil Japanese colonel. Well, there's something kind of human about him. So is there something to like? And then we look a little deeper, and then behind this humanness is this cold ideology that's unattractive.
Yeah. And that's a great scene. And Derek, I would say if the book I would say if the book has any weakness, and to me it's not really a weakness, and it's probably just a nitpick, that scene, I thought it easily could have gone overboard, you know. But I think it was the control in that scene is really it's really incredible because, you know, just maybe one or two sentences more and it would have been just way too much. I think Young does a really good job there, almost of giving us a little bit too much of the ideology and philosophy there, but I think he does a great job of restraint there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good story, and I just, speaking of the end as well, there is one character, in fact, the one Westerner we see is a doctor inside of the safe zone, and he makes an appearance. There's a part of me that wonders if more could have been made of him, but probably not. I don't know.
Well, you know, I wondered if he was almost a Deus Ex Machina type of appearance there, but, you know, it doesn't turn into that. At first I thought that was what was going to happen. But that's really not what happened.
Yeah. And then something else. I wondered if you were wondering about this as well. At one point in the book, and this is in the last half, the Japanese colonel mentioned something to one of his troops about what the Germans would say to whatever it is that they're discussing. And he mentioned something about, you know, what would the people over at the German embassy say? And that's left hanging. We don't get anything other than that brief comment, just, you know, uttered once. And I really should brush up on my Asian history during the 1930s. I mean, I do know that Germany, in the build-up leading up to the Second World War, you know, over the 1930s, had been laying down the seeds of certain allied relationships. And I don't know how enmeshed Germany was with what was going on over in Asia with Japan at the time. I would have liked to have known a little bit more about that, though, and maybe that's a problem on my part. Maybe I should be more historically astute.
You know, that's a really I'm glad you mentioned that scene or that line of dialogue, because it does touch on something that's not really developed, and again, I don't think that's what Young wants to do, but he did plant that little seed in there, maybe for readers to extend, explore some more reading and extend their knowledge of it. And he also does provide a pretty nice bibliography in the back of the book as well. But, you know, there's so much more to this that, like you said, we could explore. And I think that's just one of those little nuggets that some reader might see. And just like you and I are doing, saying, you know, I really would like to read more about that. So I thought that was well done.
Yeah, and you did mention the bibliography, and if you do want to read more about the tragedy at Nanjing, then what Young does is he gives you a really good bibliography, a list to choose from. And you can tell that Young did his research for this book, because this does seem like a kind of comics history, the sort of which we would find in other creators. I was thinking of Joe Sacco. Now, his is more journalistic reportage, but he's also done some historical comics as well. Yeah.
And, you know, Derek, before we leave Nanjing, the Burning City, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the art style. And one scene specifically that really just struck me. I mentioned before that the book lacks a lot of graphic violence, but there are scenes in here that do depict the atrocities. And Young is able to suggest through some of his artistic choices a depiction of war that's just as effective as any graphic scenes that we might see. There's one large panel on page 35 that takes up about 2/3 of the page. And in it we see a stack of dead bodies in the foreground, with the captain and Lou looking on from a short distance. And from their placement in the panel, they're drawn with very thin lines, almost as if they're ghosts. Mm-hmm. And the buildings surrounding them are drawn in these thick, black, wavy lines, almost as if their structure could collapse at any moment. And if you're not careful, you might miss, on the left-hand side of the page, a body hanging from what looks like a tree or a pole. And all of these elements combine for a very powerful panel, and the placement of it at the end of the page gives it even more impact. And after that, we see these a series of incredible panels. It's nine panels to a page, where Lou is actually looking around him and seeing the carnage on an individual level rather than a collective level. The Burning City features so many scenes like that are just so well constructed and powerful. And Young, again, has really taken a story that could have been very exploitative and turned it into a really, really powerful story that reflects both the humanity and the inhumanity of war.
You know, I'm glad that you mentioned those pages as an example because, you know, there are a lot of words in Nanjing, the Burning City, but to me, some of the most powerful images and messages to carry away from this book, those are communicated silently without word bubbles or sometimes even sound effects. And I think that example that you cited, the 9-panel realization that Lou has as he's looking down at these dead bodies, that's page 37, where we get an alternating between the images that Lou is seeing, you know, with the dead bodies surrounding him, and then the look on his face. And so you have the face of a dead man, the face of Lou, the face of another dead man, the face of Lou as he's looking elsewhere, face of a dead man, so on and so forth. And so the rhythm of that page, especially where it comes right before them meeting this older Chinese man that I mentioned earlier, it kind of builds the tension. And so you can see that Lou is becoming very agitated at this point, to where when the old man makes an appearance and he says something, you know, can you help me? It startles him. And so they almost shoot him. So I think that the pacing through the images and the sequential images that Ethan Young provides here in this book is just stunning. And along with that, I mentioned special effects. I really do enjoy the way that Young presents those sound effects. So there are occasions where, let's say, a truck or a tank is coming through the city, and you hear rumble. And I'm looking on page 89 as an example of this, and the word rumble is drawn overhead almost as if they're clouds that are creating the word rumble. And then there are also times when characters, for instance, cough, such as on page 24, or scream. I know there's one where one of the characters yells enough, and in fact it's the captain. It's on page 48. He pushes the old man away, where the words become much more art than they do sound or speech. And I think that that's an effective way that Young draws our attention to sound in this narrative.
Yeah, Young does so many things so well. The way he uses light and shadow, and like you said, the sound effects and the sound lettering placement of those. You know, this is really. I mean, we like a lot of books on this show, and we recommend a lot of the books. This is a book that you just shouldn't miss.
Yeah, definitely should not miss Nanjing, the Burning City by Ethan Young. You definitely should check it out. So, Andy, you want to look at the next title that we're going to be discussing for today?
Yeah, let's do that.
Jeff Lemire and Emmy Lennox's Plutona #1, and Jordi Belair does the coloring. So this is yet one other series that Jeff Lemire is writing. And just like Descender, this is one through Image that he's writing but not illustrating. Mm-hmm. So I know that Jeff Lemire has his hands in a lot right now, and he is one of those creators, you know, like Matt Kent is another who immediately comes to mind, who got his start doing creator-owned stuff, picked up by, you know, one or both of the big two, and now is going back and forth between stuff that he does on his own, creator-owned, and then for, in the case of Jeff Lemire, people, or at least up until recently, for DC. So very busy over the past few years.
Yeah, these guys either must have 36-hour days, or they drink a lot of coffee, or maybe both. Because they're all over the place, and you know all of the work is good. All of it's good work. Yeah.
Now, issue #1 of Plutona just came out last week as we record this, and I guess this is going to be an ongoing. I don't know if this has a particular endpoint. One of the things that Image usually doesn't do is to say 1 of 8 or 1 of 5. And if it seems to take off, then it'll be an ongoing. If it doesn't, it would be a limited series. But this is going to be going on, at least for the longer haul, and it is a story that deals with superheroes in some form.
Yes, it is. And actually, this book, Lemire does do a little bit of the art toward the end. There's a kind of a bonus story, which we'll talk about in just a few moments. But the book starts out with, I'm not going to tell you the first things that you see when you open up the book. If maybe we'll get into that, maybe not. It may be spoiler territory. But there's a boy named Teddy, who is obsessed with superheroes. He's so obsessed, he keeps a journal of their activities. Cape spotting is what he calls it. And he tells this other boy in the book, I watch and catalog the skies over Metro City, then catalog any hero sightings on my blog. I'm part of the Northwest Cape Spotting Society. We all cross-reference and correlate our findings online. And, of course, the first thing you think of is mega nerd. And this kid is kind of a nerd, but he's really, really into this. Then we meet a girl named Diane. Diane's kind of a tough girl, slightly overweight, and she has a friend named Me. And Me is being forced to watch her little brother, Mike. Well, these three are together, and then Teddy meets up with this local tough kid named Ray. And Ray kind of has a tough life. He has a drunken dad. But Ray likes making fun of Teddy's superhero fixation. Ray picks on Teddy, which sometimes verges on bullying, but you kind of get the sense that Ray actually desires some type of friendship. Well, these 5 characters all meet up and are all involved in something that brings them closer together, a discovery that's the real driving force of the issue, something that's hinted at from the very first panel.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned when you started to introduce Plutona #1 that we see something at the beginning, but you didn't know if you should mention it because it would be a spoiler. I mean, I don't think it is a spoiler because this is how Lemire chooses to begin the story.
Yeah, it is right off the bat. So, I mean, we could talk about it.
Yeah. And basically, we see the superhero Plutona, this female superhero, on the ground in the woods. And something's happened to her. We don't know what. And we still don't find out by the end of this issue. But the revelation at the end is that the kids discover Plutona on the ground and they wonder, oh, what's happened? So that's basically it. So the very first page of Plutona #1 is this kind of fractured setting in 4 panels of Plutona on the ground. We don't have any other detail outside of there's someone who is in a mask with flies on her that looks like she's been beaten up who's on the ground. That's all we know. And then we're introduced to the kids that you had mentioned. Teddy, Ray, Diane, and May. So, and then May's brother. So then they go to school. They're coming back from school. They wander into the woods for various reasons, and then they discover Plutona. And that's basically about all, not all completely, but that's about all that we get in this first issue. So it's a really good setup issue.
And, I see some things, although this is a completely different story from the one we just looked at, Nanjing. We do get a lot about these kids' characters just from the way they interact with each other. None of these kids are popular. They're often cruel, insecure. I mean, everything we've come to know from representation of teens and tweens. But these characters have depth. And, this is the stuff that Lemire really excels at. I mean, he was really excelled at it with Essex County. Same thing with Sweet Tooth. He seems to understand kids really, really well. And this really comes across here. I mean, you get the feeling that, again, just through the dialogue, we're really getting to know who these kids are. And, there's nothing inherently special about these kids, but they've been thrown together for something that really promises to be pretty extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the psychology of what Lemire is doing here as well. We mentioned Ray being almost like a bully. I don't know if I'd call him a bully, but I think he approaches bulliedom. But we do get to see a more human side to him, that there may be a reason why he is the way he is. So we don't really dislike him completely. we even get to see some complexity with some of these other characters. Now, you mentioned earlier that Diane, she has this leather jacket that she's just been working on, and you called her kind of a tough girl, a little overweight tough girl. I don't see her as a tough girl. I think she likes the look of being tough. For instance, the leather jacket with the studs that she puts into it, and she's wearing a scarf with a skull on it. But I think she is much more passive than otherwise because she lets her friend May at the very beginning of the day on the way to school wear this jacket and says, okay, you can give it back to me to wear at lunch. And of course, May doesn't. So what does Diane do? She doesn't say, hey, give me back my jacket because it's mine. But she goes through the entire day kind of sulking. And as they're leaving school, May is asking Diane, well, what's the matter with you? She said, well, you didn't give me my jacket back. So I don't know if she's so much tough as she wants to appear that way, but she's a little on the passive side. May, on the other hand, in fact, I have to say, of the kids in this story, May's the one I like least. I mean, I even like the pseudo-bully Ray better than May because at least Ray is a little attuned to people's feelings. May doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, well, I would agree with what you said, that Diane certainly wants to be seen as a tough girl.
Right.
I mean, she's trying to put that image over, and I think that's one of the reasons why she's so upset that May has her jacket, is because, here's my opportunity to look tough, and she's taking it away from me, but she's not really tough enough to demand it from her, like you said. So, I mean, there's a lot of character complexity there, and that's a typical... that's the type of thing that you might expect from a kid this age. One of the things that strikes me about Plutona #1, and again, some of Lemire's other work, is explorations of identity between these kids. These kids are learning who they are. They have certain things that they're trying to pass off, to bring across to other people, and that may or may not be true. Ray, yeah, like you said, Ray kind of approaches being a bully. He's really not one, but he's putting it across in certain ways. I mean, there are certain times that he's kind of nice to some of the other to Teddy. He's not a complete bully, and again, this is not a everything's black, everything's white type of comic. Just like in Nanjing, there's complexity. Not everybody's bad, not everybody's good. There's a lot of complexity going on.
Yeah. Well, on the topic of identity, as you pointed out, that brings us to the very end of this first issue, and you mentioned that Lemire himself provides some of the art. I don't know if this is going to be the case in every issue, or at least within the first narrative arc of Plutona, but it seems like it could. So the story proper is illustrated by Emmy Lenox, but the last, I think it's, 4 pages is a little section of an ancillary story that I'm assuming will lead us to where the kids' story begins, where Lemire draws, in fact, it looks like the page of a comic. It says Mega Comics. It's kind of a prototype of a comic book cover of Plutona, and basically the page is in half. And on one half, we get the superhero Plutona in a mask. And she's thinking, there's a word, thought balloon coming from her head, Metro City needs me. And then on the other half of the page is the woman behind the mask, someone who works as a waitress in a diner, and the thought balloon coming from her head is, but I have to finish this double shift first. And so after that, we get a very short 3-page introduction to Plutona, and we see that the person who is behind the mask of Plutona works as a diner. She's a single mother, and while she works a double shift, her mother, the little girl's grandmother, is staying with the daughter. And so Plutona comes home and says, thanks, Mom, for keeping my sweetie. And then she's called to duty as Plutona. And so the 3rd page of this brief story, we see Plutona flying off, and she's thinking that, Metro City needs Plutona. Now, I'm assuming that whatever's going on here with Plutona will eventually end up with her in the woods, which is where the kids find her. At least that's my assumption.
I think it will, too. And we're told that this is subtitled Plutona's Last Adventure Part 1. Leading us to believe that there will be a part 2. But, Derek, the thing that you mentioned about the Plutona bonus story that strikes me is, like you said, Lemire's got this split cover on that page where we see Plutona as a superhero, and on the other side as a waitress in this diner. But, it reminds me of some of the old Marvel things, like the old Peter Parker on one side, Spider-Man's mask on the other side, where we're looking at that. We're looking at the superhero world, and then we're looking at all of Peter Parker's personal problems, too. This little comic that we have is a really good reflection of that, and it has that kind of 60s Marvel feel to it. The thing about that is I think that's in such a great contrast to what's going on in the main part of the issue, because what we've got, one of the things that strikes me as so unique about this book is the way that the superhero adventures, and they're told almost exclusively from news and internet reports, they're portrayed kind of this way as this old-style Marvel, maybe even a campy 60s comic book fashion. In fact, one of the radio reports that Teddy listens to, one of the announcers says, another busy night in Metro City as the Bang Bang Gang tried to crash the mayor's annual Harvest Gala, only to be stopped by the COM Bat and SWAT Dog. I mean, it sounds like it's coming exactly like from William Dozier's voice doing the 60s Batman show. I mean, it's exactly that. It's this, kind of cornball superhero thing. Yet, we've got this adventure of these 5 kids that could take place in any kind of reality that we have today. So I like that contrast that's going on. I mean, we've got the superhero world, and then we've got the real world where these kids are having these real problems. And to me, that's very exciting.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I was listening to another comics podcast, and they were discussing issue number 1. And I think one of the problems that someone noted was that May's brother is playing with what looks like an antiquated Game Boy or some such device, and was wondering, well, why is that an antiquated game? And, if you look at the technology that these kids have, they're definitely living in a contemporary time, because, we do have Teddy at the very beginning. He's keeping a blog. He's in a chat group. So it's no different from the media and technology we have today. Yet there is older media here. He and then there's one other kid at the opening. They're listening to the radio through an old radio.
Yeah, it's an old style.
Exactly. And so what you said leads me to think that what Lemire and Lenox are doing here is not necessarily playing it campy, but maybe providing a tip of the pen to the older style of superhero narrative. With, as you mentioned, the background voice, setting things up in certain ways, and kind of having fun with the genre.
Yeah, and Teddy also has newspaper clippings, actual newspaper clippings on his wall. I mean, what kid would do that?
Yeah, today, at least.
What kid even would know what a newspaper is?
Yes.
So that, to me, that's a very exciting mixture to me, and I'm interested to see where Lemire and Lenox are going to take this.
It is interesting. Now, on that topic, what you just said, I'm interested to see where Lemire and Lenox take this. I have no clue. And, there's some number 1 issues that you read, and you have a pretty good idea of where the trajectory may be going. I have to say that after going through issue number 1 of Plutona, I really don't know where they're going here, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I do feel that this number 1 issue is a complete first installment, because there's some number 1 issues that I feel that I don't know where they're going, plus I don't feel that it's a complete segment of the story that they're setting up. I do feel that this is the latter, that we do have a complete setup in this first issue. But I do not know where Lemire and Lenox are going to be going with this. And so that's one thing that will get me coming back to this series.
I think you've really hit it on the head, Derek, because this number 1 issue, and you and I and Kunka have looked at lots of number 1 issues, but this one is unique in that we get just enough of each character, and we know more or less who they are, and we get just enough of a premise and just enough of a hook to keep us coming back for the next issue. But like you, at the end of this first issue, I have no idea what's going to happen next.
And, my guess is that subsequent issues will continue focusing on the kids in this story. And the reason I tell you that is because if you look through the various solicits that have come out on Plutona, that the cover image is of one of the kids. Mm-hmm. So issue number 1, the regular cover was of May. And so you see her standing at the very front of this number 1 issue. And then in solicits I've seen for issue 1 or for issues 2 and 3, it's the same thing, another kid. So I guess these are going to be the heart of the story. And so I'm curious where Plutona and the other superheroes for Metro City, where they will come into play.
Yeah, because others are mentioned.
Right.
But we don't see them. I also want to point out that, as usual, Jordi Belaire's color work on this is exceptional. Not only just the typical things that you might notice, landscapes, buildings, but also the characters and what they're wearing and how those colors work to help develop those characters. Just amazing stuff.
Exactly, and I think she probably colors half of the comic books that come out in America.
Probably.
Let's move on to the third title that we're discussing on today's show, and that is Michael DeForge's Lose number 7. Now, Michael DeForge is one of the creators that we've not discussed on the Comics Alternative before. We've alluded to him, but we've never reviewed any of his comics, and I've been wanting to get him on the show. I know at one point I was talking with the people at Koyama Press, who is his publisher, about getting him on. And I think last year when I asked if he was available, he wasn't, which is unfortunate. That's when Loose number 6 came out. Now we have, a year later, Loose number 7. And we should mention that Loose is a series that DeForge puts out annually. And the first, not the first 5, but issues 2 through 5 were collected about a year and a half ago in the book A Body Beneath. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't collect issue number 1 because, as DeForge points out in his introduction to this book, number 1 was just so bad he did not want to include it in this collection. And so this came out, I think, right before issue number 6 of Loose. And so I guess last year that Body Beneath came out. So if you do want to play catch up with DeForge, then Lose. You can read issue number 6, and then before that, A Body Beneath, and then now we have issue number 7.
Yeah,
and it's interesting contrast with the 2 other titles that we're discussing today. Nanjing is a coherent, recognizable, and complete narrative. Plutona number 1 is a coherent but a first installment of an incomplete narrative. And then we get Michael DeForge with Loose.
Yeah.
And, okay, how do you explain DeForge?
Well, there's no one else quite like Michael DeForge. I mean, I can't think of anybody that does quite what he does or even attempts what he does. And Derek, I may have told you, or you may remember, I interviewed Michael DeForge very briefly.
That's right,
year.
You did. Yeah,
yeah,
I forgotten about
small,
that.
Yeah, Small Press Expo.
So we did briefly get him on the show.
He was briefly on the show. He was a very nice guy. He seemed like he was maybe a little distant. That he's not the type of guy that maybe wants the spotlight. I mean, that's just the impression I got. He was very nice to talk to. He was he answered all my questions very very professionally. But he doesn't seem like the type of guy that's is out there like some other people are out there. Just proclaiming what they do. He seems like he's kind of a shy type of person. I may be totally wrong, but it was an enjoyable experience talking with him briefly. Lose number 7 too, to me is very different even from some of his other work. I've read Ant Colony and First Year Healthy. And this issue of number 7 is quite different, which I know we'll get into in just a moment.
Now, if we wanted to break down issue number 7, it's basically in 3 parts. The main part, I get, if you want to call it the main part, at least the longest of the 3 comics in issue number 7 is a story called Movie Star. And, it is complete, coherent narrative. So there is a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. And then bracketing the story Movie Star, there are 2 strips, neither of which are given titles. Right. So I'm not sure what to call them. But the very first one, and again, these are kind of typical Michael DeForge kind of comics, kind of experimental, minimalist in many ways, with art that is very almost surreal at times in its unreality. Here we have the story of someone, it looks like a young girl who has a ponytail, and someone's telling her to do certain things like, okay, puff out your cheeks, scrunch your eyes, make an angry face, get angrier, and as she's getting angrier, her head is inflating. And what happens here, well, and then I guess the friend who's talking to her asks her to put on a car to wear it like a shirt, so she does. Right. And so you have this angry-looking, big-headed, I guess, woman or young girl who is wearing a car as a body, and as she and her friend are walking and encountering other kids, just, a few things happen here or there. And that's basically what happens in this story. So, and then the friend goes to jail for having cooties.
Right. Yeah, it's really bizarre. And, it's one of the things that in a way, I think this has some tie-ins to some of the other things that we've talked about, especially with the last one, Plutona number 1. I think a lot of this issue is all about identity, which was partially, I think, what Plutona number 1 was about. But what you've got with this first story is you've got basically an exploration of let's pretend. But it's also an exploration of what differentiates the adult world from the child world. And a lot of DeForge's work, like you said, it seems almost surreal and maybe absurd on the surface, but I've never read one of his books that didn't seem like it was aiming for something deeper.
That's true.
In this first story, it's almost like DeForge is having this girl grow more and more grotesque as she tries to become more and more like an adult. And with the memory of having been a child is practically erased by the time the story ends.
That's a good way of putting it. And I hadn't thought about the stories in Lose number 7 being about identity, but if you look at this last story as well, that really does make sense. Also, in that here we have, I guess, the character who's on the very front of the book, or very front of this issue, and is someone who is a boy bird, the way that he describes himself. Although he doesn't look like a bird at all, although his arms and parts of his ears, I guess, do look feather-like. So this story starts off with this boy bird saying, some people are boys and also Chinese. Some people are boys and also need glasses. I'm a boy who is also a bird. And then he describes himself as a boy and a bird and what that means. And so then we see him speculating about the human side of him, or the boy side of him, then the bird side of him, and then wanting to have a relationship with an ornithologist. And again, kind of absurd and strange, but it does come down to identity, because he is trying to define who he is through this brief, I guess we could call it story, if it is a story.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's another one that I think makes sense if you look at the opening story. And then there's that middle one, the longer one that I had mentioned, Movie Star, and that is definitely all about identity.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I want to focus a little bit more on that third story. And I think the first and third stories are basically companion pieces. There's some interesting things, again, as you said, about identity. And I think that the third story has some ideas about how this bird boy could be transformed. But the interesting comparison is the girl in the first story is being told to change in certain ways. Her friend is saying, do this, scrunch up your eyes, do this. And she's doing all of those things and changing all along the way. It's like she's taking commands or instructions. But the boy in the last story is largely imagining those changes to himself. And he's saying things like, I am unable to participate in many of the activities other boys my age take part in. I do not have hands to squeeze breasts or smoke joints with, for instance. So you can tell immediately that this is like this adolescent type of thing. And I mean, he's just letting his imagination run wild, saying, what if I were able to do this? What if I were able to do that? Whereas the first story, this person is being told what to do.
Yeah, it's true. And then the ornithologist, and I think that this is an interesting twist in this story. She comes along and points out that, because, this bird boy mentions that he can't fly, and the ornithologist says, well, not all birds fly. Penguins don't fly, neither do ostriches. And then the bird boy goes into a speculation about what it would be like to have a relationship with the ornithologist.
Yeah.
And so talking about getting too close to your work as a scientist, and she ends up telling him, I can't. It would violate the ornithologist code of conduct. I'm sorry. It's not like I don't think about it. I think about it all the time. It's what every ornithologist dreams of, to be light, brittlebone, and fancy-free. And then this goes on into kind of another almost fantasy-like speculation. So, not only the bird boy, but the ornithologist herself has these fantasies of an engagement with birds. This one, I guess, is sexual in nature.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I have no idea what the ending means. None at all. I don't know if you do. And I know we don't want to talk about the ending, but I have no clue.
No, but I think this is one of those endings that even if we did talk about it, it wouldn't be a spoiler because, one, we don't know what to make of it, and two, well, I think even if our listeners did know the story, I'm not sure what they would make of it, because it is one of those that is extremely open-ended and ambiguous. And it didn't surprise me because this is what I've come to expect from a lot of Michael DeForge's stories. And that's fine. I think I do appreciate very much that more absurd side to his storytelling.
Yeah, I do too. I like the way DeForge challenges us in his work, not only in his art but in his storytelling. But the odd thing about it is, I think the middle story, Movie Star, is fairly straightforward and fairly almost traditional.
It is. It's strange, but it's a traditional form of storytelling. So this, again, takes up the majority of issue number 7, and it is about a young woman who is living with her father, and her father is older, not in the best of health, and she one day is jogging, because we see her exercise quite a bit. She's jogging along, and she discovers some DVDs, or I guess they're Blu-rays, her father points out. They're Blu-rays that someone has discarded. And they watch one of those movies, and the star of this movie is an actor by the name of, Gregory Tan.
Right.
And the daughter points out to her father, that looks a lot like you. And he says, no, it looks nothing like me. She said, no, you when you were younger, you don't think that this looks like you? And she even fishes out old pictures of her father, and it does seem to look a lot like this actor, Gregory Tan. And then the story takes a very interesting turn.
Very interesting and very, very strange.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, we talked about in these other issues about relationships and about identity, and Kim and her father, whose name is Lewis, they fight like most young adults and their parents do at a certain age, and each of them actually has a legitimate complaint against the other. Kim is concerned, as you said, that Lewis is not taking care of himself. He's sick. Lewis wants Kim to find a job. But when Lewis finds out that Gregory is his brother, that's when things start to really, really get strange.
Yeah, and the reason why this actor, Gregory Tan, looks so much like her father is that the father, and both of them were, their parents gave them away up for adoption. And so now they discover that they actually are brothers, long-lost brothers, and so they get together, and things start to turn very strange when Gregory and his wife, what is Gregory's wife's name? Is it Ellen, Elena?
I think it's Ellen, but I should have written it down. Yeah,
Eleanor, that's it.
Eleanor.
They want to take care of, what's the father's name? You mentioned Lewis. They want to take care of him, and so they said that they will pay for his medical bills. So he goes in for some kind of treatment, and we're not even told exactly what that is. And while he's in, he decides to get plastic surgery because, well, he's already going under the knife as it is. Why not get some plastic surgery? And he comes out looking exactly like Gregory. So now they look like twin brothers.
Yeah. But don't tell them what happens next.
No, I don't want to go into detail there, but that's where things start to really become strange. But again, it comes back to this theme of identity. Because Lewis becomes someone else entirely, and even Gregory and Eleanor become someone different from who they were when we first are introduced to them. So now the multiple personality, if you want to call it this way, the group of Lewis, Gregory, and Eleanor, this relationship takes on an identity all of its own.
Right.
And it's strange.
It is very strange. And we should mention, too, that DeForge uses a very different art style in this story than he does from the first two. It's basically a pretty traditional type of layout. I mean, you've got a lot of buildings, a lot of background. Most of the characters, or maybe all of the characters, have pretty much completely round heads on very skinny bodies, long arms and long legs. But most of these scenes take place as if they're like in an entire room. It's almost like we're watching a play. We get dialogue, the characters are in it, the scenes don't really change, but the dialogue does, and the story progresses. That doesn't mean there's not a lot of interesting things going on. There are a lot of things going on visually, and DeForge does a lot of interesting things with color here as well. I'm not sure I understand them all, but that's okay. It's fun to try to figure them out. But again, Derek, like we mentioned, this is a pretty, in some ways, a very traditional story. It's got a beginning, a middle, an end. This is a type of more of a reality-based story in some ways that we might see anywhere.
Yeah. Although, again, a little absurd.
Right.
Somewhat almost like an Edward Albee film or a play. If that just strikes me as a little strange, but. I'm glad that you mentioned the visuals, and I'm not exactly sure how to interpret the color changes as well. I think part of it may have to do with the mood of a particular scene at a certain point. But one of the things that strikes me, and you've already pointed this out, is that the vast majority of the panels that we get are presented as, I guess, long shots, what you would call in film long shots or medium long shots. It's like, as you described it, we are watching a play on a stage. And so on rare occasions, we will get, if not a close-up, then a medium shot. For instance, I'm looking on one of the pages where early on Lewis and Kim are having a conversation, and we do get to see them basically from the chest up, considered, I guess, a medium close-up shot. But more times than not, that's a rarity because the paneling, we're given an entire room, again, like we're watching whatever's happening take place on stage. Another thing that's notable about the paneling is that unlike the first and third brief pieces that we get in Lewis number 7, is that DeForge removes the gutter space in the story Movie Star. There's no gutter. Basically, you have a series of panels, and I guess in many cases there are 8 per page that are basically one right up against the other. And so they're uniform, but there's no gutter space. And if you look through it quickly, you may be tempted to feel that some of these pages that are made up of 8 panels are actually not separated, panels, one from the other at all, because they're right up against the other without any gutter.
Yeah, there's I'm looking at that scene where they're in the restaurant, and I think it's on page 41. And if you looked at it, and if you just quickly looked at it, you would think that this is not a 2-panel shot of 5 people at a table, but it's a shot of 2 different groups of 5 people at a table, and that one panel is not just one couple at a table, but 2 couples at 2 tables. So yeah, removing the gutter, it does make it, it sort of gives it a kind of feel of immediacy, but the story's not in any hurry, though.
And and maybe I'm reaching for it here, but the fact that we have gutterless paneling where one panel seems to be rubbing up against and maybe even melding into the other, that's not that different thematically from what's going on in this story, where you have a character who seems to be turning into, at least visually speaking, another one. And not only visually, because there are other things going on we don't want to give away. And so there is this kind of closeness, mashing up of not only the panels, but the characters themselves.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
It's definitely a different kind of story, and it's the one that stands out to me in issue number 3. But like you point out, there's a lot to be said for the first and the third untitled stories in Luz number 7.
And, Derek, I think for somebody that has not experienced DeForge's work before, this would probably be a pretty good introduction. Again, I don't think it's as nearly as experimental as something like Ant Colony or First Year Healthy, or even I read Luz number 6 last year when it came out. I think this is pretty easy entry point for somebody that wants to explore DeForge's work.
Exactly. And DeForge is someone who is constantly cited as one of the most exciting newer writers over the past several years. And, we see his work in anthologies, and I know, the Best American Comics collections, and so he's someone who is definitely making waves. So if you're not familiar with the work of Michael DeForge, whether it be the brand new issue number 7 of Luz or even other works, as you have mentioned, like Ant Colony, then you should definitely check out his work.
I don't know, Derek, if he's going to be at Small Press Expo. I haven't looked in the last few days, but I hope he is.
Yeah. And, maybe we should also tell our listeners, we may have mentioned this to listeners before, I can't remember, but you and I will be at Small Press Expo in a little less than 2 weeks from now. Mm-hmm. So if our listeners are going to be in Bethesda at SPX, then check us out. See if we're around. We'd love to meet you.
Yeah, we would.
So, Andy, we started off this episode by looking at Ethan Young's Nanjing, the Burning City. Then we moved on to Plutona number 1, written by Jeff Lemire with art by Emmy Lenox. And then we wrapped up with issue number 7 of Luz by Michael DeForge. And so that was quite a spread.
It was quite a spread. And, I think we did find some common elements. I think all of these comics at some level touched on identity, but those are 3 very different works. So it was interesting to find some commonality there.
Yeah. So very good books, and if you want to find great books as well, then you can't go wrong by visiting the website of our sponsor, and that is Discount Comic Book Service, dcbservice.com, and you can pre-order future issues of Plutona and then the annual Luz when it comes out. And actually, if you're wanting to find Young's Nanjing, the Burning City, you can go to the sister company of DCB Service, and that is In Stock Trades. So if you go to instocktrades.com and do a search for Nanjing, you'll find that you can get this book at 42% off of the cover price. So instead of paying $24.99, you can get this through In Stock Trades for $14.49. Great deals. You can't go wrong with those guys. And after you do get your comics at either DCB Service or in-stock trades, get in touch with us and let us know the kind of things you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find on the right-hand side of your browser a tab that says Send Voicemail. Click on that, and from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile device, you can send us a message through the wonders of SpeakPipe. It's very simple and easy to use. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And if you would like to be informed of updates to the podcast and to the blog, you can join us on Twitter. Follow us there. We are the number 2 guys with PhDs, and we appreciate everyone who retweets our tweets.
That's right. You can also email us. We're 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can email me directly at derek@comicsalternative.com. And Andy, how to get in touch with you?
You can reach me at wolverton@comicsalternative.com.
You can also find us on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Instagram, on Google+, and on Pinterest. And as some of our listeners have been doing, such as Stefan and Sam, you can also find us on our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And as always, you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as our reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And that's at comicsalternative.com.
Yep, all kinds of ways to get in touch with us.
Mm-hmm. And we do like to hear from you, so please do let us know what you think of the podcast. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy.
We'll see you later.